good evening. This is LinkSeasonMaster, self-proclaimed crazy person and goofball extraordinaire. Now, this is my next vlog, and I figured we're going to talk a bit about the two movies I saw in theaters today. Back to back. It's like not that long in between. Though mostly for scheduling reasons, because I'm not going to have too many opportunities to see movies between now and a little weeks from now, because I'm going on a trip for the first time in a while. I also, another reason the scheduling is being kind of stupid is, well, despite the overwhelming success of Demon Slayer, they're still only giving a lot of animated movies, especially ones that are not tied to pre-existing franchises, very limited run times in the United States, at least around where I live. But the fact that Demon Slayer has been in, apparently is still being shown on a bunch of movie apps as being in some theaters around here and there, even though it's been a few months now, that's a good sign that things are changing. But hopefully that change will come soon. But anyway, before we get into that, two movies I saw tonight. One of them, Black Widow. The other, Josie, the Tiger and the Fish. Yep, I said the title correctly, because I apparently screwed that up earlier. Anyway. Now, I'll probably go into some spoilers here and there, but those who don't know, the Black Widow, we finally get to see Natasha, aka the titular Black Widow, get a movie all to her own in the MCU. Long overdue, and that honestly ties into kind of one of my only gripes with the movie. The other, Josie, the Tiger and the Fish, is basically about this college student in Japan who is working several part-time jobs and is kind of an overachiever, but mostly because he's trying to save up enough money to fulfill a childhood dream of going to see specific fish on the other side of the world. And lo and behold, by sheer luck, he ends up finding himself looking after a young lady in a wheelchair in order to make a living. The two don't get along initially, but they start to really grow to respect one another and something more. But those are the general premises. But first, let's talk a bit about Black Widow, because I do have a bit to say about that, but not as much as Josie. And once again, if I haven't said already, some spoilers. This isn't scripted, so I'm just going by what I remember. Anyway, Black Widow, it's a great movie. Great action, some pretty good humor, great character introspections, pretty darn good villain, too. Not as good as some of the other ones in the MCU that we've seen in recent years. Like, I still think there's a reason people still love what they did with Thanos. Though some people seem to realize just because he was sympathetic does not mean he should be justified. He's not to be admired. Still, I do like my deliciously evil villains. And this guy was definitely one of them. Honestly, I think my only real issue has less to do with the movie and more to do with how it's set up. It's not like Wonder Woman where the whole movie is a flashback. No, from start to the beginning of the credits, this movie is implied to be taking place in real time. Despite the fact that this comes out after Endgame, which means Natasha's not around anymore. In fact, the ending cuts the post-credit scene ties directly into the aftermath of that. And while it does lead to some interesting ideas going forward in the future, which I'm very curious to see how they have handled. But the movie itself, like the real movie, I'm going like, all I can think is, why? Why didn't this come out between Civil War and Endgame? It should have. There is. I mean, I know we've been waiting on a Black Widow movie for ages, and we were supposed to get this last year if not for the pandemic. But why? Why are we getting this movie now and not. Hold on, let me. I'm going to double check the dates on, like, when did Civil War come out? Hold on. Manic Universe Phase 3. Why didn't. Yeah, this. Should have come out sometime in either 2016 or 2017. We shouldn't have had to wait 4 to 5 years for this, because it's really, really good. I think the only other real thing, like, not only that, just the way it's told, the story, it just doesn't make sense now to have it now. It should have come out several years ago. I mean, it's a great movie, but if you are going to watch this, I recommend, especially if you haven't seen this stuff yet, or if you're planning on doing a rewatch, to my advice, watch this sometime after Civil War, but before Black Panther if you're going in relative release order or story order. Because it doesn't make sense to have it where it is. It doesn't make sense to be part of Phase 4. It just doesn't. Oh, one other good thing about this movie, the design of Taskmaster. Got mixed feelings about the identity. Like, then, I mean, on the one hand, I know it's not the first time they've apparently changed the gender of a villain. It works. It definitely works for the purpose of the narrative. But I'm kind of bummed, like, because I've played many issues as I have with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, nowhere near as much as Infinite. I do have my fair share of issues, though. But Taskmaster was hilarious in that game. He had some great one-liners. I'm going like, I think they handled his redesign well in the movie, but it's not a. And I have no problems with changing the gender of the character too, because honestly, that's all MVC3 is all I really know about of Taskmaster. I've not really seen too much of him in other, like, I'm kind of behind on a lot of shows, so I'm not really that much familiar with him outside of that game. But in this one, it's a female. It works, and it wasn't who I was expecting it to be. But I do love Taskmaster's design. Curious if we'll be seeing more of Taskmaster as well as the other operatives from, well, the victims of the Red Room, because they've been finally freed of their brainwashing. Curious to see where things go from here. But I think they could have. I think they just should have had this movie earlier. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this movie was supposed to have come out. Like, and I know, especially in light of certain things we've learned over the past year or so, there have apparently been a lot of shenanigans going on behind the scenes. So maybe that had something to do with it. Because we should have had this movie a while ago. It shouldn't have been 4 or 5 years after when it clearly took place. Like, I can just tell, like, that ending cutscene is the only part of that movie that makes it be part of Phase 4. That's it. But that's all I have to say for now on Black Widow. Now, for Josie and the Tiger and the Fish, like, the two leads, Sunio and, well, her real name is Kumiko, but she tells everyone to call her Josie. They have some really adorable chemistry. Like, and neither of them are perfect people. They're likable but flawed. Sunio, he clearly needs, like, he's frustrated. Like, once he gets his job, he's clearly frustrated as heck. Like, he's not a saint. He doesn't have perfect patience. He seems like that at first when he's first introduced. But once he starts working for this, he's going like, ugh. Like, you could, and his coworkers at some of his part time jobs, like, they're very likable, flawed but likable. Like, and that's what I like in a cast. I think it's also one of the reasons why Rumiko's works tend to be either hit or miss with me, because I do respect the idea of not writing a perfect character, but flawed does not mean they have to be unlikable. That is a big thing that I feel a lot of writers do not understand. You can have perfect is not a good thing, but if you really want to make a flawed and believable person, still make them someone we want to root for, you know? Anyway, but Josie, who's in a wheelchair, like, she struggled. Like, she's clearly a very talented young woman, but she's also kind of has a hard time believing in herself, believing in that she's kind of self-dependent and capable. When in a lot, because there are certain things she very much cannot do on her own. Like, the movie makes that clear. Like, not through any fault of her. Like, there's certain things that even as much as she is capable of, there's certain things she can't help, and it sucks. But there's certain things she doesn't realize she can do on her own. Well, Sunio, he's in a tough spot because he has these big dreams, but money and having to work is something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Can especially when at one point in the movie there's a tragedy, and actually technically a few, but one that it almost seems like they kind of swap roles, where he becomes depressed and she has to be the one to kind of snap him out of it. And she does so with this picture book she ends up illustrating that I honestly want a copy of for my younger cousins, because it is. I was starting to tear up there. I'm kind of bummed I didn't start crying, but I was tearing up. And part of the reason I could connect to that is my one of my grandfathers. He got polio just before the vaccine was made available to the public. In fact, he got it on his honeymoon. So his kids, they got to see it go down, him like lose all this stuff over time, because he survived. But by the time I was born, he had lost the use of both his legs and his left arm. At the Up until he passed away when I was 12, I never really thought of him as handicapped. He was one of the smartest men I know, still know. And he was a very good teacher. He taught me how to play Scrabble. Fun to talk to. I would ride on his lap when I went to the zoo. I have a lot of fond memories. But looking back, I can see that he did not enjoy having to lose as much as he did. It hurt. There was still a lot he could do, to the point where there were these certain people who he would regularly talk to over the phone to teach them and whatnot, but when they met him in person, they were stunned to learn he was in a wheelchair. Just goes to show you that you really need to learn when and where to sell yourself, when and where to have faith in yourself, and when and where to just accept help. It, it hurts. Like, I've had my own struggles due to being on the autism spectrum, but there's only, but I think there's no ifs, ands, or buts. As much as I've struggled, as hard of a time as I had, none of what I have compares to what my grandfather went through. I would never trade what I have for what he did. It would be not only disrespectful to him, but there is so much he was capable of, so much I am capable of. I may not always remember that, and I do have some self-esteem issues, but in this movie, I feel like it tackles that in a good way. Knowing, trying to strike a balance between not cutting, like, being, like, especially considering this is Japanese culture and they are, a lot of Asian cultures are kind of notorious for being way too polite when you, to the point of kind of misleading people in other cultures, but I can just tell that even in the context of this movie, and I watched it dub, which was, I think it was really good. I think the voice actors did a phenomenal job. But they don't, and they also show that a lot of these people tend to either get ignored unless you ask for help, or just plain disrespected. But they also make it clear there are good people out there too who show this. There's both. And one does not mean you should just stay locked in your house. Because there's a bad group out there does not mean you should stay locked in your house for reasons that are a little ridiculous. Like, if it's something like a pandemic and your life is actually on the line on a regular basis, if the vaccine's not out, yeah, it makes sense to stay home. But if it's just plain bullies or people being jerks, yeah, it helps to have people. It helps to have people out there to be nice to you, but once you get a little more experience, there's nothing wrong with you doing this on your own, too. I really enjoyed this movie. It clicked with me in a personal way. The animation was amazing. It was a beautiful movie to look at. But considering this is Studio Bones, who also do My Hero Academia, I ain't surprised. Honestly, I can only really think of one thing that's arguably a little hiccup in the animation. Because, like, it's like they know when and where to showcase their skills. And I can understand you only have so much of a budget. If you blow it all too much and too much during the beginnings, you may run into situations like Evangelion did. Or, if you're smart about it and you know where to cut corners, you can either make it work to your advantage, or it can just be barely noticeable. Like, I had to really strain my eyes towards one part of the credits to notice, yeah, they might have cut a corner there. But, not the worst. It was barely noticeable. I had to really squint to notice, and honestly, I could have been imagining it. Because it was consistently really well done from start to finish. Then again, this is a 90-minute movie. If you'd probably want to make and not a regular TV show, so you kind of have to, like, that lasts like anywhere from 13 to 26 or more episodes. You got to be smarter about it. So you probably get a little more wiggle room. But I think it's one of my favorite movies now. I don't think it's dethroned Summer Wars for me yet, but if you like something that is a good balance between knowing where to have hope and knowing when to be respectful of limitations, this is a good movie for that. Especially if you have a family who are physically but not mentally handicapped. If you know people like that, this is a good movie for you. Because, heck, even if you are mentally handicapped or you have family who are, this might still be a good movie for you. I think it'll work. Anyway, I've probably said all I can really think of because it's getting late and I'm not at the movie theater anymore, so I can't really. It's not as fresh in my head as it was. But I definitely am getting I'm definitely getting Josee on Blu-ray once it's available. Because I want to show some members of my family this. And hopefully, the next time we get more good movies like this, they'll take a note from Demon Slayer and give them more of a chance. Even if they're not tied down to a popular shonen series or a pre-existing property that's well known in the States. Give them a chance. because you will, because you'll get some great audience reaction and money, and the money was well spent, in my opinion, on my part and on the people who made it. Anyway, goodbye. Until next time.